Right. Very good morning, everyone. Um, Building on our lecture yesterday, that this part of our class, we'll be looking at development, the issue of environment in development, right? So I hope as we go look through this that you get some ideas of how do you think about your assignment 4. How do you integrate theories to understand real life situation, or especially your societal concerns, but be it environment, be it health, be it poverty, be it equality, especially between men and women and gender issues. So so yesterday we looked at health. So today we're going to be looking at the environment. What I'm more concerned is not so much the information, because I know there are tons of information. You can be there's so much information out there tentang environment, tentang development. You probably be overwhelmed by the information and data that is available. Now, the important thing is for you to learn how to interpret this data, what do you make of this information? How do you transform information to become knowledge? Remember, when you come to university, you come untuk menimba ilmu. So when you menimba ilmu, you live with ilmu. So, but what differentiates you, the information that you have from your grandparents or your mothers or your siblings or your cousins who have not been to university. From university, when you leave university, you're supposed to come to live with ilmu, with knowledge. Now, but how do you transform all this information around you, the data that you see, the things that you read in all the, through social media, through books and journals? How do you transform this information into knowledge? That is what that requires skill. So I am more interested in you getting this skill, how to transform information into knowledge, how to transform data into knowledge. So as you go along this, as I go along this lecture, just look at how the data are integrated to become something, to become an analysis, to become to form a policy, to come up with a model. That is what knowledge is all about. You're producing something out of information and data that you see. So development and environment. So in this lecture, I have this recorded as well. I'll be on video. I will upload it. So those who I will be uploading it, and also will be so that it can be heard and can be seen or by others who are not able to make the class. So here we'll be looking at relations between population and environment. So that there are, as mentioned, we'll be drawing on how modernization theory look at the environment, the socialist development and the natural environment, and the emergence of sustainable development, intermediate technology, poverty and environment, we look at it a bit, but not so much. Ecotourism, we will not look into it too much, but that is an industry that come out with the concern between environment and development. So so if you want to look at what do you call it, as a case study, you can look at ecotourism. Theories for the relationship between population and resources. So when we study or concern about development and environment has emerged as a result of the rise of population, jumlah populasi yang telah meningkat secara mendadak sejak beberapa dekad ini. So you can see, I think if you take another course that I'm doing on globalization, I used to do you see how through history bagaimana jumlah penduduk dunia telah meningkat secara mendadak, every 100 years. So now the world's population today is 6.9 billion, right? Now this is a very good, this is an example of a crisis with human population growth and the link between the environment and especially looking at food supply, right? You can see here, this is the year 180, 200, the year 200, 400, 600, 800, they go on until 2000 here, and then beyond that. And this is the demand on food, you can see going up, and this is the trend. So now you see the world food delivery systems going up, trying to cope with jumlah penduduk, as jumlah penduduk semakin meningkat here, coming up to billions here, going up billions here. So probably here we are 6.9 billions here, right? 6.9 billions here. So you can see the crisis here is a world food delivery system. Here you can explain the thinking, in the beginning it says a world food supply. I think I can. So I think I can provide enough for world population. And then it comes to a stage where we say, I hope I can. Here it's begin to be, there seem to be uncertainty begin to set in. And the next level is I really hope I can. That begin to kind of like, okay, is this going to be so going to go on survival mode or what? So it's an exclamation, yeah. The person is, so man, I hope I can. So this chart is basically represent what the world is thinking about the link between population growth or development and the environment, because our food basically comes from our elements, from the earth, from the soil, from the environment, from the river system. That's where naturally where our food comes from the forest, from the earth, basically, yeah, from the soil, from the earth, from the river, from the lake, and so on and so forth. Now, this element, natural environment, can it continue to supply food for us as human population growth semakin meningkat? So that is the crisis. So that was a big concern. So there are two perceptions on this. There's two ways to look at this. One is very pessimistic approach to it. The other is very optimistic approach to it. So the pessimistic approach came from or muted by Thomas Malthus. He lived from 1776 to 1834. He wrote an essay in 1798 called Principle of Population. Di dalam essay tersebut, he described a forthcoming population catastrophe. Catastrophe here means malapetaka, right? Jumlah penduduk yang terlalu banyak yang membawa kepada satu malapetaka, population catastrophe he called it. Well, when he did his essay, the world population was then 9 million. Now the world population has now exceeded 6 billion. Yeah, so now I think probably 6.7 billion, right? So so you can see the increase from 1798 when he wrote the essay, from 9 million to now to 6 billion, right? So so for him, he said something needs to be done to this. If the population growth continues, this will lead to population catastrophe, whereby there is not enough food in the world. Yeah, there's not enough food in the world because the environment, the earth, the soil, the available of land, the land available, rivers available to supply food for us will not be enough, because this land cannot be multiplied, rivers cannot be multiplied, the forest cannot be multiplied, our resources for food cannot be multiplied, but multiplied in a way. But when you compare this with the population multiplication, it is almost it is very suggestive that population increases faster than food, than food supply, whereas food is essential for life. So therefore, Malthus predicted that population would grow until it reached the limit of food supply, then there would be widespread poverty and famine. So he said if population continue to grow, but there's limited food, then there will be, ini akan membawa kepada poverty and famine. This is what he calls the population catastrophe, membawa kepada kemiskinan dan kebuluran, right? So he based his idea on this mathematical calculation. He recognized that population, if left unchecked, will grow geometrically, meaning from 1 person to 2 person, 2 person to 4, 8, 16, 32. Whereas food supply increases arithmetically as the amount of land is finite. So from 1 to 2 to 3, 4, 5, 6. What does it mean here? Geometrically means 1 person, he takes the idea, if 1 person gives birth to 2, you take the idea of geometrically multiplication. 1 person will give birth to 2. Now 2 person, each person will give birth to 2 person becomes 4. Now 4 persons give birth, each will give birth to produce children. Produce children, two per person, it becomes 8. So 8 people, 8 produce 2 anak becomes 16. 16 becomes 32. So it goes. So the population growth will be. I mean, this is what's happening. That's what he said. If we don't check population growth, this will happen. So manakala, when you look at the food supply, doesn't grow like that. You cannot say, if I have 1 acre of land, then you want to you cannot say that land will produce 2 acres of land, and then that 2 acres of land cannot produce. So you can only, probably you can extend your land another acre, become 2, another acre to become 3, another acre to become 4, another acre to become 5, and 6, and so on and so forth. So there are 2 different way growth here that he highlighted, that if population is left unchecked, it will overwhelm the food supply. So consequence dia adalah ini boleh membawa kepada the food supply become outstripped by population growth. So population here and the food supply expand in different ways. Satu geometrically, satu arithmetically. So if we don't control the reproduction, population will outstrip food supply. So this is what he said. And therefore he said this would be this is what we call Malthusian catastrophe. Population growth, food supply goes like that. This is time. Okay, ini masa, ini population. So population will go up. So food supply grows steadily, 1 + 2 + 3 + 30. So but food population can go up like that, right? So he said so at this point, where population reaches its limits of food supply, there will be war and famine. So when population goes up beyond, outstrip the food supply, ini membawa kepada peperangan, kebuluran, dan membawa kepada penyakit, right? So so for him, you don't want to do that. So with that, Malthusian checks. He said Malthus stated that once population reached this point, which point? This point. once it reached this point here, checks would come into play to readdress the balance between population and resources. Positive check is increased levels of misery, that is war, famine, and disease. So increase of war, famine, and disease, dan ini akan menurunkan jumlah penduduk lagi. That is what he called positive checks. Positive checks. Preventative checks will come into play kalau orang semakin they choose not to get married, so become celibate, celibacy. They choose not to become to be involved in any sort of relationship, let's say marriage or civil union yang boleh membawa kepada what they call it, lead to children, bearing of children, or people choose to not to get married. People choose to marry later, so meaning they don't have as many children as they're supposed to. I mean, if you get married earlier, right? So, is there evidence to support Malthus? So there has been, so dia menggunakan apa yang berlaku di Sahel region. So, there's been a population explosion, repeated wars and famines in Sahel region suggest population growth has outstripped food supply. Yeah, this is a, he look here at the Sahel region here, Sudan, Chad, Niger, Mali, and this whole area. This is what he called this is the Sahel region, where the food population growth has outstripped food supply, right? So ini telah menyebabkan peperangan berlaku, ini membawa kepada famine, ini telah membawa kepada kemunculan penyakit because kekurangan makanan, very little nutrition for the population, right? Right, so FAO says that more than 800 million people are chronically malnourished. UN said that by 2050, 4.2 billion people will be living in areas that cannot provide enough water for basic needs, right? So in fact, some people suggest, a very well-known professor in Australia, not Australia, in India said the war in the future is not, peperangan masa depan adalah bukan peperangan untuk minyak, not for energy, tetapi peperangan untuk water, clean water for basic needs. So for him, he predicts, that is his prediction. So UN suggests that 2050, 4.2 billion people will be living in areas that cannot provide enough water for basic needs, right? But there are critics towards pandangan Malthus ini. Ada yang mempunyai, they have critical, what do you call it? They have criticism towards his, critiques towards his idea, right? So, what do his critics say? They say that Malthus did not allow for the development of new technology. Dia tidak memberi penekanan kepada pembentukan ataupun kemunculan teknologi baru untuk menghadapi masalah kemiskinan, masalah kebuluran, masalah medicine for disease and so on and so forth. So the opening of new land for cultivation mainly in the less economically developed world. So dia kata one thing he misses, dia gagal untuk melihat pembukaan tanah baru yang lebih luas di negara-negara yang kurang membangun untuk penanaman, untuk pertanian dan peternakan. Dan dia juga gagal melihat kepada pembangunan atau irrigation systems, dengan sistem irigasi untuk pertanian yang boleh meningkatkan increase yield. What is yield? Hasil tuaian, hasil tuaian penanaman. So he said irrigation system makes a lot of difference. Dan dia gagal melihat the green revolution, di mana there is a widespread introduction of high yield crop varieties, pesticides, fertilizers. High yield crop varieties mean biji benih tanaman yang membawa kepada hasil yang lebih banyak, dan juga kadang-kadang hasil yang dituaikan dengan lebih cepat daripada, let's say in the past you can only grow to grow one time. In 1 year, you can only grow one time rice or one cycle. But nowadays, you can do 3 cycles because there are rice now that can produce rice in 3 months. So you can do 2 cycles, 3 cycles. So high yield crop varieties. And then also the slowdown in population growth as countries develop economically and progress to the later stages of demographic transition model. Ini menunjuk kepada demographic transition model, meaning semakin maju sebuah negara itu, you can see demographic transition model is sebuah negara yang kurang maju. You can look at the triangle is like that. Yeah, the tip, yeah, the bottom is wide like this, meaning yang tua itu lebih kurang daripada yang muda. Yang muda they are at the bottom there. Now the demographic transition model, if sebuah negara seperti Malaysia hari ini, it's semakin the triangle is becoming more what they call it, it's slowly being overturned. Like in Japan, there is more golongan orang tua daripada golongan muda. Sebuah negara yang maju, there is lebih ramai golongan muda daripada golongan tua daripada golongan muda. So in Malaysia, it's already beginning to change. Our demographic model is already straight like this. Yeah. So one is like that, and then it becomes like this, and then it becomes like that, right? So demographic transition model. Yeah. So there's a slowdown in population growth as countries develop economically and progress to the later stages of the demographic transition model. So for instance, this is a profile of 5 stages of demographic transitions in Taiwan. Right? So first, second, you look at 1951, 1967, population size, 7.9, going up. Fifth here, right? Now, mean of birth, you see that, mean of okay, marriage rate, right? So marriages, couple, divorces, couple semakin meningkat, right? So this is the profile. You can see, yeah, figure trends of birth until from 1951 to 2018. So semakin menurun figure of birth, yeah. So this is basically this is what we call a demographic transition model, right? But again, this is the profile. In this you can see the trend here, trend of birth. Now, that is a very pessimistic view, yeah, Malthus, because if you have to look at it. So his pandangan was contested by a well-known, one of the first, what they call, some people call her a feminist thinker, called Esther Boschrap. In 1910 to 1999, he wrote The Conditions of Agricultural Growth in 1965, right? So her idea is opposite to Malthus. So for him, he said, people have resources of knowledge and technology to increase food supply as necessary. So kita tidak hanya bergantung kepada keadaan our environment, but we also, technology and science also can help us to increase our food supply as we deem necessary. So her point is, environments have limits that restrict population. So he agreed with Malthus, but this limit, according to her, can be changed using technologies, yeah, which can increase food supply, expand food supply, right? So, and then he said population growth is the trigger for her. He said population growth is bukanlah masalah dia. It's not the akan membawa kepada malapetaka. It will not lead to catastrophe. But for her, he said, population growth is the trigger. Actually, it leads to the trigger for innovation to allow food supply to increase. So it triggers innovation in terms of irrigation, weeding, crop intensification. Yeah, so you come up with better seed quality, shorter masa untuk menuai innovation in terms of tools and techniques to plant, to harvest, yeah, to store food and to process food. Yeah, so this he said will offset the population catastrophe as proposed by Malthus. Yeah. So what are the evidence which supports Boshrap as this idea? He said there's increasing intensity of shifting cultivation. So she was looking at di negara-negara kurang membangun ketika itu, terdapat banyak shifting cultivation, so where people are opening up land to plant more vegetables, to plant more bahan-bahan makanan, right? So ini bermakna ya jumlah tanah yang dibuka untuk what they call it for food supply has increased. So there's a move from slash and burn practices to using irrigation, yeah, in rural areas with higher population density. So misalnya, so now dari padi bukit kepada padi sawah using irrigation, so dia membawa kepada hasil tuaian yang lebih banyak. Now, the Green Revolution, there's a widespread introduction of high-yielding varieties of seeds, dan the introduction of pesticides and insecticides, and also baja, yeah, fertilizer. So ini telah membawa kepada hugely increased yields, which allow for more people to be fed. Yeah, so technology and innovation and knowledge boleh mengubahkan keadaan yang telah disarankan oleh Malthus. Boshrap admits that overpopulation can lead to unsuitable farming practices which may degrade the land. Yeah? For instance, population pressure is one of the reasons for desertification in the Sahel region. But yet, yes, but still technology can be used to undo the situation, right? I don't know whether you are familiar with the process of desertification. Ini merujuk kepada perubahan sebuah where an environment becomes a desert. Mula-mula it's a forest, suddenly it turns to become gurun. Ya, this is apabila sebuah tanah itu dibuka dan dengan menggunakan pesticides and fertilizer, it kills the organism in the soil. So ini membawa kepada tanah yang tidak ada organism, tidak ada zat. So it leads to leads to the existence of deserts, gurun. Right, so she doesn't contest that. She's because unsuitable farming practices may degrade the land. Right, so how does the theory that we have looked at so far fit into these two different approach, yeah, or perspective on the relationship between the environment and population growth? Now, let's look at theory of modernization. Modernization approach was built on the ideas of mobilizing technology to use resources more efficiently through industrialization and the mechanization of agriculture, right? So theory of modernization. Then remember, technology and science adalah penting dalam modernization theory. Dia adalah penting untuk tackle issue of poverty, issue of backwardness, and so on and so forth. So the mobilization of technology is very important. So basic attitude to ini mempengaruhi, ya, attitude to the natural environment, di mana the natural resources are seen as input into a human device system. Yeah. So little attention is paid to the potential environmental damage or the long-term sustainability of such an approach. Yeah, so for modernization theory, they look at the environment to be sesuatu yang yang boleh digemblengkan, ya, untuk kebaikan manusia. Tidak kira, ya, tidak banyak perhatian diberikan kepada, ya, the damage to the environment. Yeah, so theory modernization. So you can see during the Industrial Revolution in England, the environmental impact of rapid urbanization and industrialization were clear. Frederick Engels, in his book, The Conditions of the Working Class in England, describes the results of overcrowding, poverty, and unregulated industrial processes. Right? So that is modernization theory. You can now I have to put make it clear here. Theory modernization modernization is the first theory to emerge to look at issues of development. So in those days, concern about environment, the environment is not popular, right? Now, that is so a good example of the link concern about modernization theory and the environment is to look at the Industrial Revolution in England, the environmental impact of rapid urbanization, industrialization. Yeah, so you can look at this. This is very clearly described by Frederick Engels in his book, The Conditions of the Working Class in England. Ya, di mana remember when we talk about perpindahan penghijrahan penduduk daripada kawasan luar bandar ke kawasan bandaraya seperti London, Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, ini telah membawa kepada overcrowding, membawa kepada kemiskinan and unregulated industrial processes. So that is the one of the impact of modernization theory or a modernization approach to development, to between the development and environment, the link between the two. How about socialist approach to the environment? Now, if modernization theory sees the environment need to be taken into be part of human device for human survival on the planet Earth, for the socialists, yeah, if you read Marx carefully, development involves human ability to transform nature to increase standards living. Yeah, so the control of taming of nature has often been a key element in the development strategies of centrally planned economies. So for them it is untuk mengawal ataupun kontrol alam sekitar untuk menjadi sebagai strategi pembangunan, right? So ini in Das Kapital, Marx perspective on human dominance of nature is reflected in this description. He develops the potentialities slumbering within nature and subjects the play of forces to his own sovereign power, right? So here Marx is saying that there are potentials in the nature around us, like water, for instance, it has potentialities, that these potentialities, yeah, they are slumbering. Slumbering here meaning they are tidur. Yeah? So you can then wake them up, these potentialities in nature, wake them up and transform them into forces that can be controlled by human beings. So for instance, water, you can transform water, you can use water to produce electricity, like this Rawa. So that is what I call the slumbering. There are power, there are forces within water that you can transform into other power that you can use for your daily life, your daily living. Right, so the approach is some of the largest individual development projects have been implemented within centrally planned economies. Yeah, for instance, the Three Gorges Dam in China, they are some of the biggest dams built in the world. And then also in Russia, you can see mega projects. For these countries, when they think about projects or development projects, they don't think small projects. They think about big projects, big dams, big roads, big jambatan, big power supply. These are the ciri-ciri centrally planned economies. Yeah, this is basically the fight. Basically, because the fight between democratic system and communism system, or between free market and socialist models of development, right? Right. If you look at the two of them, yes, they look at the environment differently. They have different notion of how to handle development. But at the end of the day, both models of development, yeah, see the nature ataupun environment boleh diguna pakai untuk membangunkan ekonomi, ya, right? Untuk for perkembangan ekonomi. So both has what we call modernist projects, yeah? Modernist projects with the focus to technological solution to perceive, yeah, limitations of the natural environment was challenged by the increasing environmental movement in many parts of the world during the 1960s. Sorry, the modernists, or both socialist and modernist and modernization theory, they are all focused on technological solution, yeah? Untuk melihat, untuk sebagai teknologi sebagai what they call it, solution to human problem. But in 1960s, there emerged a movement that contest their idea, yang mencabar, ya, pandangan that the nature around us boleh digemblengkan untuk kebaikan manusia. Yeah, so there is an environmental movement. One of the earliest concern was raised by Rachel Carson in her book called Silent Spring, that she dealt with the environmental impact of insecticide, that is DDT, the way it is stored in organism that if it is ingested, it leads to the death of mammals and birds. Remember, Esther Bishop said, yeah, fertilizer, pesticides are good. This will kill pests to yang memakankan hasil tuaian. Now they'll introduce insecticides seperti DDT. But actually, according to Rachel Carson in her book, she said this thing has impact on the environment, dan racun itu boleh stored in the organism, dan apabila dimakan oleh mammals ataupun binatang dan burung, ini boleh membawa kepada kematian kepada mammals, all those animals. Yeah, so equally it will have effect on human bodies. So ini membawa kepada what we call the limits to growth model. Both socialist models and modernization theories, they both propose growth models, yeah, growth models of growth models development, right? So ini membawa the limit to growth model telah disarankan oleh what we call the movement called the Neo-Malthusians. The Neo-Malthusians, they raise the concern, go back to the idea yang telah dipropose oleh Thomas Malthus, but then come up with the different bearings to look at it. Yeah. So the new Malthusians, he said, accelerated population growth in LACD since renewed Malthusian fears. Yeah. So ini telah membawa kepada the movement by the Club of Rome to commission a study, yeah. And then in 1972 dan telah come up and publish their result called Limits to Growth Model, yeah. Apakah had kepada model model what they call it, growth model perkembangan dan pembangunan, ya, in economic terms. What is Club Rome? Yeah. It is an NGO research organization. Yeah. So limits to the model, growth model place the relationships between economic growth and the natural environment at the center of the debate, right? So just now there are two perspectives, Malthusian and Boshrup's idea. One is pessimistic, one is optimistic. Then you look at the models, modernist models, be it modernist models and socialist models of development, kedua-duanya menyarankan growth model. Yeah? But kesan dia kepada the environment become too big to be ignored. Yeah? So 1962 with the work of Rachel Carson, then 10 years later, the Club of Rome telah membuat satu research, dia penyelidikan, and then they publish their finding. In their finding, they place the relationship between economic growth and the natural environment at the center of the debate. I want to make this very clear because today in to now we are 2021. We talk about sustainable development, we talk about the environment, we are very concerned about our environment, concerned about the sungai, concerned about the forest disappearing, concerned about the birds, concerned about the ocean, concerned about so many things regarding our environment. Now, for us yang telah dilahirkan lebih lewat, so we think these things are common. Now, in those days, nobody was thinking about the environment. All their concern is about economic growth. Now, the Club of Rome members put these two things, economic growth and the natural environment, at the center of their debate. This is their conclusion in 1972. If present growth trends continue, and if associated industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion continue unchanged, the limits to growth on this planet will be reached sometime in the next 100 years. The most probable result being catastrophe, that is a sudden and uncontrollable decline in population and industrial capacity. Now, Malthusian talks about population catastrophe. He talks about war, famine, and disease. Now here, yes, they agree with Malthusian. If we don't control population growth, yeah, and then population growth leads to economic growth. Ini berkaitan dengan industrialisasi, dengan pollution, dengan food production, resource. Kalau ini membawa kepada resource depletion and so on and so forth. If those things are not taken into check, yeah, left unchecked, he said, ini akan membawa kepada a sudden and uncontrollable decline in population and industrial capacity. Yeah, right. So decline. So it's not talking about decline in terms of war, famine, and disease, but he's talking about capacity manusia itu sendiri. Yeah, capacity manusia itu sendiri akan menurun. Right. So basis of this doom-laden prediction is based on 5 processes: population growth. Yeah. Malthus hanya melihat kepada population growth. Yeah. One is population growth, the link between population growth and land. Right. One is arithmetically, one is geometrically growth. Yeah. So, but here, Club of Rome says their population growth, and then non-renewable resource use, pollution semakin meningkat, food supply, and industrialization. So these are the 5 processes that they highlighted. So Club of Rome adopts the view of development which places economic growth at the heart of the process in terms of helping to improve poorer people's standard of living. Yeah? So economic growth is not just to harness wealth, bukan hanya untuk mengumpul kekayaan, but it must improve standard of living, taraf kehidupan golongan yang miskin. However, the nature and rate of this growth must be controlled so as to ensure that future generations have access to non-renewable energy resources, minerals and agricultural land, as well non-polluted environment. So we have to think about the future. We eat today having a mind of the future generation. Is the Club of Rome right? Don't panic doesn't take into account the ability of humans to respond to situations and innovate. Right, so it's the same thing again. They bring the idea that technology is still important. Yeah, the Club of Rome is right, but technology still can solve our problem. But the difference here is it's not about big, huge technology, but intermediate technology, meaning technology that is appropriate. Technology that we use must be relevant to the context, must be relevant to the society, must be relevant to the situation. So this is basically a notion introduced by Schumacher, E.F. Schumacher, through the book Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as people method. So here, there's a change. Tadi dia Malthus hanya melihat kepada population dan environment. And then Esther Boschrap brought in technology, right? And then the Club of Rome said, no, economic growth and the technology and the environment is important to consider, right? Now, but a group says technology is still important, but this technology must put here, people method. People now becomes part of the debate, right? Tadi is just growth, food, and the environment. Here, people do matter. So rather than concentrating on maximizing flows of money and economic growth, he argued that economic policies everywhere in the world should be people-centered. This is to allow individuals to be human rather than merely a cog in a large economic machine, also in recognition of existing environmental destruction that was occurring through the use of existing economic approaches, right? So for Schumacher, the answer is not to return to pre-industrial primitive age, rather it was to implement policies which were appropriate to the needs of particular groups of people. In countries where there were large number of people without formal employment, Schumacher stated that it was bad practice to implement policies using high-tech equipment which could do the work for hundreds of people, right? So he said, let's say if there is high rate of unemployment in Malaysia, why should you replace tenaga manusia dengan high-tech equipment, that can do the work for hundreds of people? So you need to look at the situation and then implement technology that is appropriate. But it must the technology that you put in place must consider the whole notion that people method, people must be at the center of it. So ini telah membawa kepada this ongoing debates, ongoing debate. Starting from 1962, when the environment was brought into the debate, especially by what is the name? Not Schumacher, Rachel Carson, right? And then Schumacher. In 1983, the UN set up an independent organization called the World Commission on Environment and Development. It was chaired by the then Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Brundtland. Please remember that it's important for you to understand when we say Brundtland report, it is by this Prime Minister. So the aim of WCED was to examine the problems of environment and development facing the world and to consider possible solutions. These solutions should be considered not just for current generations, but with an awareness of long-term issues. So dengan itu, in 1987, Yeah, the World Commission on Environment and Development, WCED, published its finding in a report entitled Our Common Future, also known as the Brundtland Report after the WCED chair. The report laid out the environmental challenges facing the world and examined how environmental destruction would limit forms of economic growth, and also how poverty and disadvantage contribute to environmental destruction. Right? So ini leads to what we call today pembangunan mampan. Now we have Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, Millennium Development Goals, Sustainable Development. Yeah, so it all came from the WCED work, their research. In 1983, in 1987, they produced the report. It was telah what they call dibentang at the United Nations. The report stressed on sustainable development as a goal towards which the international community should work. According to WCED, sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So, pembangunan mampan di sini merujuk kepada pembangunan yang memenuhi keperluan masyarakat hari ini tanpa compromise memperhayakan ya kemampuan generasi masa depan untuk meet their own needs, yeah? For them to meet their own keperluan, right? So to supply for their own needs, right? So meaning you have to, when you plan something, you must have not just think about the current people are living, but also the future generation. So in 1992, in Rio de Janeiro, sustainable development has become a key element in development theorizing and policy making. There are debates over term ya, tentang apa itu sustainable development. There are debates and then tentang the approach. So out of this, there are two notions or approach that emerge. One is what we call light green, technocratic approaches, versus dark green, so ecocentric approaches. There are two here, light green versus dark green. Light green is technocratic approach, dark green is ecocentric approach. Light green is focused on humankind and the improvements in human standards of living and quality of life. No radical changes in the current economic and political system. Yeah? So it's just kind of light green. You just make sure that you don't disturb the environment too much. Whereas the dark green start with premise that is the earth which is much more important than the ideas about human progress and rapid economic growth. Yeah? The earth is more important than human progress and rapid economic growth. Right? So sustainable development light green approaches is a process. Sustainable development is a process that empowers people in poor communities to ultimately help themselves. Yeah? Sustainable development is powerful, it's long-lasting development. It is an empowering process that places those being affected at the center of their own development. People are equipped with the necessary knowledge, skills, and appropriate values and attitudes to act and manage their own development. It is holistic, considers human rights, gender equity, environment, effective communication. Sustainable development is non-discriminatory and protects the dignity of all people. It does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, gender, religion, political opinion, national or social origin, or birth status. Yeah? So all sustainable development projects must be planned, it must be monitored and evaluated. And then it also considers human rights. Must into account basic human rights as agreed upon in 1948 by all members. So these are basically the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Yeah, so it includes men and women of the community, includes long-term planning, infrastructure building with local products and people power, yeah, water and food availability and security, building water pole, making sure that people have access to water and good food, yeah, income generation, teaching practical ways for families to become self-sufficient, health education, yeah, teaching population how to eat variety of foods, washing of hands, safe toileting, brushing of teeth, primary school education, that is part of sustainable goals development, peace and regulation, birth education, peace and regulation and reconciliation education, yeah, conservation of non-renewable resources and finding alternate resources, yeah, advocacy, looking after innocent, helpless children, a knowledge of how to network with local governments, with state and federal government, with other development organizations in the area. That is what we call sustainable development. So here, this year, they launched the SDGs for 2020 to 2030, or last year, yeah, 2020 to 2030. All right, any question? I will put this up. I've recorded this and earlier on, and I will put it up on eLeap and also on WhatsApp, so that those who are not able to attend the class today be able to hear it. Listen to it. Any question? Hello, are you all there?
Yes, doctor. I have no questions for you.
Yes.
Okay. I hope I'm not putting you all to sleep, or I'm not making you all feeling sleepy. Okay, so I hope you can see this is what we mean by the environment is out there, development is out there. So the theories that the approach that you embrace, or the theory that you apply, will give you a different picture of what's going on in the real world. So that is basically what I hope to translate into a form of skill for you to embrace. So when you leave the university, you just don't take things for granted. Yeah, you think through things. You look at situation. You look at the environment. You look at how people are building dams. What sort of analysis can you do? Can you work through, or what do you think is going on? Is it socialist models or modernist project, or all these things must you now must think differently. You cannot just take things for granted. You are social science student.